saying, Eric, thank you so much for jumping on.
No, I'm excited to be here. This will be great.
I'm here today with Eric from RB Alliance. If you don't know me, I'm Phil. I'm a partner at Webisoft. We build custom software and are interested in everything around innovation. So, without further ado, Eric, if you want to introduce who you are and what your company does.
Sure. I'm Eric Detton. I work with RB Alliance, as you mentioned, but our company focuses primarily on the extreme front end of the oil industry, where we are what we call a pure explorer. And so we focus on delineating, finding, outlining where we think the oil deposits are, and then moving forward from there.
How did you get there, actually? Well, can you describe a little
Well,
bit of your
yeah.
career path?
Sure. Yeah. So my background, I have been in the oil industry for just under about 25 years now. So I cut my teeth with ExxonMobil. I have degrees in engineering and then an MBA, and started out in reservoir engineering because I felt like that would be really the bread and butter of the industry, and I wanted to have a good understanding of how it worked. I worked with ExxonMobil in a number of different roles over the years. Spent some time as well with Murphy Oil and with Baker Hughes, and so the latter, I'd say probably 75% of my career has been in much more commercial oriented roles. So things like strategy, business development, strategic planning, things of that nature.
Hmm.
And so I have been with RB Alliance for about the last 2.5 years now, and initially started out doing some consulting work with them through my dad, actually. And he would ask me and some of my opinions and thoughts about the industry and about what we were doing or what they were doing, and what I thought of their new technologies. And the
Because your dad is
more
in the business, right? Just to
Now that's
clarify.
right. So my
Okay.
dad, my dad is actually the CEO and co-founder of the company.
Okay. That
And
helps.
so,
Getting
yeah,
in.
so well, there you go. So it was a good connection, but initially I thought it was just another one of his business ventures, to be honest. And we'd sit around the table and he'd start asking me some questions and start telling me about some of the things that they were doing. And more it started to catch my attention. And I realized that these two technologies that they pulled together within the company had a lot of running room. And they had some big gaps that they needed some help with in terms of being able to get things off the ground. And, one thing led to another. And ultimately, that's where I am today. So I've been with them for about 2.5 years.
And what's your current role?
So I lead the strategy and development for the company. Because it's a small company, I end up wearing a lot of hats. So I do the engineering work and the marketing. We've got a small team that helps support in a variety of different ways. Uh, but ultimately, I hold down the fort on a lot of the different elements outside of the geoscience. We've got a great geoscience and a legal team, and they are ultimately the core of the technologies that we have. And so I find myself juggling and wearing a lot of different hats as depending as the need arises, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. That resonates. How big is the team, actually? I'm curious.
So full time, we have less than 10 people full time, but we have a number of different consulting groups that we work with part time, some different partners and investor groups that we're working with. And so it's a larger umbrella than initially appears, but behind the scenes, there's only honestly a handful of us that are working full time to try to keep everything up and running. It's
Right.
a little bit like build the plane while you're trying. I mean, I guess it would be fly the plane while you're trying to build it is really kind of the mentality where we're at right now.
Right. I use the cliff analogy often with some of our clients who essentially build our tech while we're, building products for them. And then obviously you can have the rug pulled from under you when that happens because they make changes and it affects the entire project, right? But
That's right.
yeah, like the jump off a cliff and then build a plane as you're free falling. Quite familiar with that. Um, how would you describe a typical day for you?
Gosh, it that goes back to the wearing the multiple hats. And so on any given day, I may be running some new economics or building new engineering models and predictive models for the basins that we're discovering. Right now, the focus tends to be much more on the investors and the partnerships as we're trying to move forward. Our plan is to drill our first well in the spring of this next year. And so we're just getting all of our ducks in a row, working with regulatory, making sure that we're complying with everything that we need to, and then lining up the partners and investors so that we're ready to hit the ground running.
So what does that mean in your context? Like finding investors? Or like, do you need investors per project, or are you guys doing a financing round? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so we are in the middle, yes, of a financing round for this first phase. We have a prospect that's ready to go and ready to drill. And that's really what we're using as much as anything is kind of our test area. And I say, our test area because what's unique about us is we have two different technologies that we are combining for the first time that if we're correct and if this works, then not only does it prove up the play, but it also now proves that these two technologies work in conjunction. And that opens up a huge amount of running room for us with a number of additional prospects we've identified.
Mm.
And so we're treating this first well really as kind of a phase one. And then if successful, then the full development of that field would be the phase two. And then moving beyond that would be the phase three of multiple prospects as well as implementing the technology much more broadly.
And this technology is proprietary to you?
It is. Yeah, we
Oh, it's
have,
exciting.
yeah, it is exciting. So, I mean, just a little bit of a quick background on those two technologies, and maybe this is a good springboard for that, is the both of them have been developed individually since the mid 1990s. And
Hmm.
so by two independent groups. The first is a satellite-based technology where effectively the way that works is hydrocarbons over long periods of time sitting in the ground give off trace signals that are detectable at the surface.
Hmm.
And so using satellite imagery, we can go through and we can identify using the correct filters and knowing what to look for, we can identify the locations where there's a high likelihood of having hydrocarbons subsurface. And so it's not a 100% science, but it's a success rate well north of 50%. So, and part of the reason that that's exciting, or I guess part of the reason that the success rate, maybe I should say, is as low as it is because over time hydrocarbons can migrate. Things move. You have surface disturbance and a number of things. But regardless, you end up with basically think about it like a heat map of a
Yeah.
lot of really promising areas that have a high likelihood and high probability of having hydrocarbons. And so one of the challenges with that, though, is that you don't know exactly where those hydrocarbons are coming from. If they've migrated, if they are subsurface
Mm.
beneath that spot, and if so, how deep they are. And so that introduces our second technology, which is called DMT. And so that's basically a it stands for digital magnetotelluric. And so the way that that works is the sun naturally has electromagnetic rays that come in and penetrate the Earth's surface, and those bounce off the layers of the Earth.
Yeah.
And so standing at the surface, we can, using the right kind of measurement tools, we can detect those different rays that are coming back and the waves that are coming back. And it gives us a great indication of what's specifically beneath the ground where you're standing. And so not only can you tell the different horizons and what types of rock, whether it's a shale or a sandstone or whatever it may be, but you can tell what they're charged with. And so that's where you can see if there's oil, if there's gas, or if there's water, or maybe nothing at all, and how deep those different layers are.
Mm.
And so the thing that's cool about our company is when we combine these two, we have the DHM or the digital hydrocarbon mapping, and the what happens with that is we go across the full areas, we can see where the hot spots are, and then we bring in the second team to do the DMT, which is basically the pinpoint locations to be able to say, now specifically beneath the ground, here's what we see in this spot. And so between the two, we can put together incredibly detailed maps of the subsurface and three-dimensional volumetrics and have a great understanding of exactly where the oil is, where's the water contact, and so forth. And so between the two, we feel like we have an incredibly accurate and inexpensive way to understand what's really in the subsurface.
Right. That's a good one-two punch. Is any part of that automated, or is it mostly human intervention? Like, have an actual team, of people at the location you want to survey.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. There are elements of each of those different processes that are certainly automated, and we have algorithms and we have filters that are in place
Hmm.
and things like this to be able to shortcut it. But a lot of the technology, to be frank, is still elements that were used back, in the early 1990s, right? And so
It's
some
not
of the
broken.
foundational things. So it's not broken. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And, I mean, we can segue into this as we get talking, but I mean, we have a lot of thoughts about, if successful and if we prove that these do work very well together, where do we go from here? And what are the next steps? And how do we implement next gen technologies to improve what we currently do?
So machine learning, pattern recognition, stuff like that.
That's exactly right.
Hmm.
Yeah, so exactly. Your artificial intelligence and drones and, machine learning sorts of
Yeah.
elements and, replace a lot of the human elements.
Technically, AI could have a first look at the heat map and then send drones essentially to kind of do the second part, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm saying
And
that
that's
as an outsider,
just
looking in, but yeah.
well, yeah, and that's right. And I mean, we were able to look at incredibly huge, large areas at a very, very inexpensive rate, effectively for us, and that's through the satellite imagery. And so, huge advantage there. And then one of the questions that starts to come into play is, well, how do we filter? Can we do that consistently?
Mhm.
Are there elements of that we could digitize or turn over through machine learning and AI to be able to replicate more quickly? And then the same thing in terms of the second technology with, some of the I guess some of the acoustics and the sound waves and some of the other electromagnetic waves that we're trying to filter and process that rely heavily on human ability at the moment. So
Right.
are there ways to improve that and make that consistent and then scalable moving forward?
Yeah, and so is it scalable on a global scale, or are you restricted to the territory that you can I guess, look at?
Right now, it's restrictions of manpower and restrictions of, really time. And so if we have targeted areas that we're looking at, so for example, we have large areas within Utah and Wyoming that we're focusing on at the moment, because that's within the bandwidth and the capability of what we can do as a team. Now, moving forward, if successful, certainly we have much more running room and we have a much broader portfolio of prospects and leads that we've identified beyond those states. But the other advantage is that there's wide application far beyond just simply our own company.
Hmm.
And so if, some of the larger companies were to get hold of our technologies and try to implement those and we were to work with them, we would need those scalability elements and digitization elements such that we could do it much more quickly in a much broader area, for the customers.
Yeah, maybe some of them are listening now. Who knows?
That's, that's that way
Um,
you can hope, right?
yeah. How do you decide where to survey? Like, is it the client driven? Like, does some oil company comes to you and asks, like, I want to explore this region of the world. Like, do you have solutions for me? Or is it more of a almost like a preemptive or a proactive measure from you to survey different areas and then have that data?
There have been elements of both, honestly, historically. So as I mentioned, both were developed independently and have been up and running for 30 plus years. And so in that time frame, the two different groups have worked with a variety of different clients and customers, many of whom have existing areas where they want surveys done and they want additional information. And so in that case, it's, kind of a case by case ad hoc sort of a basis where we can perform this in a variety of different locations and environments. Um, when we pulled the two together and started working with them together, a lot of our focus was on areas that were local for us and where we had existing land and acreage positions to be able to assess and say, well, what do we have in our positions and then in the area around about? And so a lot of the acquisitions that we've picked up are based on the combination of these two different technologies where they look extremely positive. And then some of the acreage that we're focusing on was already in our existing portfolio. And so it really is kind of a combination. And moving forward, we certainly intend to move forward with our own portfolio, ramp up and scale up a lot of the different prospects that we have. But then as we start working with a lot of these partners and investors are stepping in, they additionally have portfolios of their own and areas
Mm,
of interest where we've done some work with them already moving forward.
right. So it's something that basically comes to you organically. It's not really you don't really have to force it. It happens. It just happens.
It has so far, and I imagine if successful, it will certainly scale up a lot more quickly, and we'll have to be a little bit more selective with who we work with.
Well, so there's a bit of a licensing play that you're contemplating, essentially, if this technology
Right.
works. Right.
Absolutely.
Mm,
Absolutely.
that's cool. Exciting.
It is exciting. It's a It's a big step change from working with one of the big players for sure.
Well, because you're at the ground floor of, trying to build something essentially, which is, I had the same conversation yesterday about somebody who's like in an enterprise type setup for years,
Yeah,
and all of a sudden he's into a startup, right? So it's a entirely different vibe.
it's totally different. High
Yeah.
risk, high reward. Everyone's
Yeah.
got skin in the game, and but it's fun where everyone has specific roles and specialties, but the amount of collaboration and communication between the team is much higher than anything you'd see in a larger company for sure.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, because you have to.
That's right.
It's not a well-oiled machine yet.
That's right.
Yeah, pun intended. It's an oil pun.
Well
Um,
played there.
Thank you. What's the biggest frustration for you in the industry, right? What's an outdated process that you kind of stuck having to use, whether that's legacy in your own company or, just the way that things are always done externally?
Great question. I think, if we're trying to keep it within the same vein of oil exploration, I would
Hmm.
argue that probably the incumbent that we're trying to derail a little bit is seismic. And so if you look at seismic,
Hmm.
basically it's a technology that was developed, I believe back in the 1950s. So
We've
it's
had
been
some
around for a
guests
long time.
from that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's essentially just an acoustic platform where you generate a sound at the surface, it goes down into the subsurface and then bounces off the different strata and the different layers
Yep.
and comes back, and you have all the different phones at the surface that can kind of put together an image of what's happening beneath the surface. Um, so over time, that's progressed where they've moved into 2D seismic and eventually 3D seismic, which I believe was back in the 70s and 80s, where that
Hmm.
started really gaining traction. And that's basically trying to put together three-dimensional images of what's beneath the surface. And so that is a technology which, rightfully so, is still the gold standard for the industry in terms of having an understanding of really what's down there. The challenges that seismic has, though, is it's extremely expensive, very time intensive, and it's limited geographically. And why I say that is because you can't drive trucks. The usually truck mounted or the acoustic sound things are done along the roadways. And if you have mountains or difficult terrain or areas that are largely untouched by man, then without fairly significant cost or pretty significant environmental disturbance, it's very challenging to get in there and do seismic.
Hmm.
And so what we've seen, great example would be in our own area in Utah, going through central Utah, where it's very mountainous, very hilly, and yet over time, over the last 70 years, there have been a significant number of seismic surveys that have been done in the region, all of which happen to follow right along the roadways. And so unfortunately, Mother Nature doesn't necessarily coincide with our, roadway plans, and
Right.
what's down beneath the subsurface may not necessarily perfectly align with where we happen to build a highway or a road that we can get
It
to.
can happen, but
You can absolutely,
yeah.
and so you'll find a lot of the drilling, happens to be similarly along the roads, and so
Oh, I see what you mean.
um,
Yeah, so there's a whole untapped, you know, there's a lot of
absolutely.
areas that you're just not looking at because you can't really survey until now,
Yeah, that's
potentially.
exactly right.
Yeah.
And so, why we see, a couple of advantages that our technologies would bring to the table for that is not dismissing seismic or the utility or the value of it, but we are able to look at areas unrestricted completely from geography
Hmm.
and what happens to be, whether there's a mountain or a valley or a canyon or a river or whatever it may be. We can still see subsurface whether or not we believe there are those hot spots and hydrocarbons there. And that's using the satellite imagery, which obviously wouldn't have any sort of restrictions. But then with the DMT, the second technology, it's currently portable and handheld type devices. And so we're restricted only by where somebody can go on a hike. And so that gives us a lot more flexibility in
Until you
terms
use
of
drones, then there's no restriction,
that's exactly right, which
except for
is
no
which is
fly
kind of
zones,
the
I guess.
yeah, which would be DMT, I guess, 2.0 at this point, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
But yeah, we've been talking with universities and research groups about exactly that and where could we potentially take this and what would that look like. And we're not ready to pull the trigger on that just yet, but that's exactly the sort of thing that we're looking forward to coming down the road at us.
Yeah, and then potentially robots also could help. Kind of like I'm thinking of a like the Boston Dynamics type, like the
Yeah,
dog
yeah.
carries the equipment to where you want to go, and maybe that's
There you
cool.
go. A little R2D2 or something out there, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Because then
right.
if it's a 3 hour hike, it won't mind.
That's right.
What are you most excited about for the next 5 years in oil and gas? Aside from, I guess, your own success, right? But is there like a big thing coming that you're really excited about, technology wise?
I think the coupling of AI with the oil and gas industry is really exciting right now, to be honest. Um, and I think the two industries, to some degree, have been diametrically opposed from the standpoint of their development timeframe. And
Sure.
so oil and gas, if you look at oil and gas, change takes place at a glacial rate. And so this
Yeah.
is going to be over decades.
Yeah.
And even advents of new technology like wind and solar that have tremendous amount of subsidy and government backing and support from environmental groups and all these different elements, those are technologies that have taken the better part of 30 and or 40 years to even get close to about 5% of the overall global demand. And so it's not something that moves quickly, and that's
No.
because you're talking physics, right? I mean, it's moving atoms, it's pipeline, it's infrastructure, it's wires and lines,
Hmm.
in addition to the adoption rate from the consumers. And so it's just an industry that takes a long time to move. And now you've got AI to contrast with that, where if everything lines up and if things make sense, AI in a lot of cases can be adapted and become the new gold standard, in some cases almost overnight. And so adoption can take place in the course of months for an app and single users, similar sort of time frame, companies within a year or two, industries then within just a few years. And so AI very, very rapidly changes the landscape. So then the question is, when you combine something that moves that quickly and has that many different types of efficiencies with an industry that is, dinosaur type pace, what happens and where is the change going to happen? And so I think that would be the space that I'm probably the most excited about and want to see what happens kind of within the next 5 years as you really start to implement some of those technologies.
How do you use it internally, if at all?
Well, I used it an awful lot in preparation for this podcast, making
Oh,
sure I
yeah.
had my time frames and notes and things. But I think where it has application in oil and gas, and where I think it's really going to make a game changer for us, specifically at a small scale, would be with some of the processes, algorithms, repetition, scalability, and then making sure that we can be consistent in our approaches, that we're reducing a lot of that human error. And so right now we've got some phenomenal geologists who work with the team who are very, very good at what they do. But 5, 10, 20 years from now, we're going to have much higher demands on the company and what we need to do. And those individuals ideally will be retired and, sitting back and enjoying a very different lifestyle. And so how do we replicate the knowledge that they have developed over 30, 40, and 50-year careers? And I think that's one of the areas that applies for us. Um, I think in oil and gas specifically, if we're looking at this exploration space and maybe going back to the seismic example, the cost of seismic will still be there. The difficulty and challenges from the standpoint of the terrain are still going to be there. But where I think AI can make some massive headway is in the processing and filtering of the data and identifying
Hmm.
trends and identifying nuances that would be missed by humans. And it can now look at massive, massive databases and refine and improve those algorithms, such that you're now really taking a lot of that human error and the human time out of that equation. I think that's really one of the areas where AI honestly can make a pretty substantial impact, just on the exploration element, not to mention production and development and some of the other areas of oil and gas.
Do you think there's room for a solution for knowledge transfer using LLMs or, I guess, specialized models that would essentially retain some of that senior knowledge where, like you said, like a lot of that, it's a kind of an old industry, right? With
Right.
older-ish people in it. And at one point, like you said, they're going to retire. And one recurring theme on the podcast is that the transition is hard, right? Whereas even like people used to go to the office, talk to, and then there was kind of a passing of the torch, if you will, from
Hmm.
old to new generations, and it seems to be harder these days. One of the things that AI can do very well is retain information, obviously, and become kind of a queryable database, right? So,
Absolutely.
as this was a recurring kind of idea with our guests, but in terms of knowledge, basically the simple form of it is uploading someone's brain into a DB, right? And then the new generation can kind of, okay, how do you do this? Oh, it's this way, right? You know,
That's right. That's right.
is that something that you're
Well,
thinking of at all?
oh, 100%. Well, and to your point, the people who are the best at this have been doing it for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to transfer that knowledge, even if you could transfer all of the knowledge, would take multiple years. And so when you're coming up against that clock and saying, okay, well, do we have that much landing strip or, I guess running room
Yeah.
to be able to transfer all that knowledge effectively? And then even if we are to do that, would it be as good as the original?
Mm-hmm.
And so those are hard questions to ask yourself. And where I think you can use some of the machine learning and some of the AI to step in and supplement that is leveraging those same algorithms, leveraging the same learnings and saying, okay, here are the interpretations that have been done now by these original folks hundreds of times across the world. What are the consistent elements? What are the themes that we can leverage? How can we improve upon these algorithms that have been developed? And then use some of the time over the next couple of years rather than necessarily just transitioning and training somebody new. It's training somebody new working with something new,
Mm-hmm.
where there's a refining process where you can say, okay, the results of that aren't exactly what we would want it to be. Let's tweak it, let's adjust it, let's make sure this works. And now the new individual isn't necessarily replacing what the original person did. They are now using a tool quite differently to do the same thing that the original person did. And I think that's really the vision that we have over the next 5 years as we start to transition and then get to the point where we can be scalable with both of these technologies.
Do you think you'll be able to scale the company without exploding your headcount? Essentially, is there an opportunity now to kind of scale this with robotics and AI?
Yes to both of those questions, actually. So I think it's absolutely scalable. I think our vision is that we should be able to accomplish this with a pretty small footprint, maintain our focus on what we think our core competencies are, which is the finding of the hydrocarbons,
Mm-hmm.
and allow others to step in, do the development, do the production, and do the marketing and different pieces like that as we then move on to the next fields as we continue to try to find and promote what we do. And so keeping our focus, I think, will be a huge benefit for us, where that's one way that we can maintain the team size a little bit smaller. But then the other is, through exactly as you mentioned, through the automation elements and through the AI and through the machine learning and the robotics, some of these different pieces where we can use a small team to now do a much, much greater body of work.
Yeah, that's the dream. And I think, most startups are kind of, or at least thinking about that, right? Where like, how do you stay small but scale still? And there's a
Right,
couple of really
right.
good examples of like, multi-billion dollar companies with 10, 50 people, right? Like Telegram is a good example, um, out of Russia, if
Yeah.
you're familiar with it. Final question for you, Eric. I know I want to be mindful
Okay.
of your time, but um, what do you think is going to be your biggest challenge as a company in the next 5 years?
I think a lot of it is probably the biggest challenge for us will be the existing sedentary inertia that the industry has.
Okay.
And I say that where there's been a huge amount of pressure for the last decade plus on capital discipline, where companies are
That's a good way
stepping
to say
back.
this. Yeah.
Right. So they're stepping back from the very aggressive and high risk exploration type mentality that was pervasive for, the prior couple of decades. And a lot of that is because of the advent of the shale boom and the
Mhm.
opportunity to be able to step in and drill a well with virtually 100% certainty that you're going to have some produced or some production coming from that. And so the shareholders, the stakeholders, the governments, there's a lot of pressure on these companies not to be so willy-nilly with the capital and to invest, quote unquote, intelligently, where they have effectively lower margins and they have, um, lower margins and guaranteed cash flows, but then their risk profile is also considerably lower.
Right.
And so that's appetizing and that's appealing to a lot of folks. And so where that will end up being or has been even a challenge for us is people say, well, this is the way things have been done. They're looking for companies that have proved production. They're looking for companies that leverage heavily the incumbent, which is Seismic. And they're looking for someone who does things the same because that's what's been endorsed and blessed by the higher ups.
Right.
And so to find people who are willing to step outside the box, think a little bit differently, and employ a higher risk approach, although, we consider still a very low risk exploration mentality
But it's higher in perspective in comparison to yeah.
relative to the shales. That's exactly right. And
Yeah.
so it's a higher risk approach. And if someone is willing to embrace that, and we have found quite a few who absolutely see the vision of what we're trying to do, the margins are massively different. And the opportunity in the running room is just absolutely huge. And there are some people who catch that vision, and those are the people that we want to work with.
Right. So you need somebody to take a chance, and after that you should be good. I hear I've heard the saying quite a lot in oil and gas. It's everybody wants to be first to be second, right?
That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's a great way to say it.
And so they'll line up after that because you've done it
Well,
once.
that's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And, we're in a chicken and an egg scenario right now
Yeah.
where we've identified dozens of prospects that are extremely promising and we're really excited about, but we don't hold the acreage positions for those yet. And so it's this interesting chicken and an egg thing where if given the capital and if given the funding and this influx of cash, we can pick up those acreage positions with high degree of confidence that a number of them will be extremely profitable. But if we went ahead and we drilled with that capital up front, well, now we've proven it, we've established it, and we've now introduced another land grab that's coming our direction, and the price of all that acreage will skyrocket. So it's an interesting kind of a balance where, what is the risk tolerance that we have? What is the risk tolerance of the players and the partners that we're working with and hoping to work with? And, are they willing to step outside of the norm and buck those, sedentary inertia mentalities that I think are pervasive right now?
I think again, like if you do it once, they'll line up. If you
That's
prove
right.
it, if you prove
If
it
we prove it.
works. Yeah, if you have hard numbers to back it up. Eric, thanks
Hmm.
so much for your time today. This was very insightful.
Yeah, this has been great, Phil. I appreciate it. I appreciate what you guys are doing, and I'm excited to see where you go with it.